They didn't wait for the sun to set before deciding she would die. Justice in Dry Hollow didn't come wrapped in law books or evidence. It came in whispers, in boots scraping dirt, and in ropes tied tighter than truth. That day the gallows rose faster than the trial began. The town gathered like buzzards around a carcass. Men with sun-cracked faces and women clutching their children stood in the chapel yard, eyes squinting against the dry wind in judgment. Some stood out of duty, most came for the spectacle. In the center of it all stood Annabeth Cole, bound at the wrists, dust smeared across her pale skin. Her white blouse clung to her shoulders, damp with sweat and bruises. Blonde hair tangled across her face, but her eyes, those piercing blue eyes, refused to look down. She had been raised here. She had danced barefoot on these wooden boards, handed out cornbread at the harvest fair, prayed in this very chapel. And now she was the criminal. The preacher, now acting judge, stood atop a crate, his voice thick with self-righteous fire. "Annabeth Cole," he boomed, "you are accused of aiding the enemy, of giving food and shelter to a Comanche family under active pursuit by cavalry patrols, and worst of all, of raising a weapon against a white soldier." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "She laid with them." Another, "She's worse than them." Annabeth tried to speak. Her voice cracked like dry bark. The soldier aimed at a child. Silence," the preacher thundered. "The devil doesn't get the final word." A rotten peach arced through the air, slapping wet against her shoulder. Laughter followed. She winced but held her chin high. Her gaze swept the crowd. She found Lucy, her childhood friend, her Sunday school partner. Lucy stared at the ground. The only movement was her lips, silently mouthing a prayer, or maybe an apology. Not one person stepped forward. Not the ranchers her father had fed. Not the doctor whose daughter she once nursed. Not the mayor's wife who called her a blessing. By high noon, the preacher raised a hand and pointed toward the hills beyond town. "She'll hang where her treachery began, at the border of the Indian lands. Let the savages see how we treat those who betray their blood." No jury, no lawyer, no appeal. Only the sentence. They threw her into a wagon like spoiled fruit, hands still bound, legs bruised. Two men rode beside her, rifles across their laps, spitting tobacco and curses as the horse pulled them out of town. One of them leaned over and sneered, "Should have let the Comanches keep you. Might have saved us the rope." She didn't answer. Her eyes never left the forest line ahead, where the world turned darker and older, where the trees still whispered names lost to blood. The wagon stopped at the edge of a clearing. A giant oak tree towered over the earth like an executioner's shadow. Its limbs stretched outward, gnarled and twisted, bark scorched from fires long forgotten. It was the same tree where, decades ago, white soldiers had hung Comanche warriors, leaving their bodies to rot as warnings. Now, a white girl would swing from it. One of the men nailed a crude wooden sign to her chest. "Lover of savages," carved in anger, nailed in shame. No one read her last rites. No one asked her final words. They didn't care if she was guilty. They only needed her to be wrong. The noose was thrown over a low-hanging branch. They kicked the box out from under her feet. She didn't die instantly. Her legs twitched, body convulsed. Her fingers scraped at the rope. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Just a soft, choking rasp that vanished in the wind. She hung there, between life and death, between innocence and damnation, beneath a sky that burned orange with indifference. Somewhere behind her, a raven screamed. But what no one knew, what Dry Hollow would never write into its history, was that she wasn't alone. In the tree line, cloaked by shadow and silence, a man watched. He had skin the color of dust and bark, with eyes that had seen more graves than sunsets. A knife rested in his calloused hand, not raised, not drawn, waiting. His name was Tachuka, Comanche-born, white-hunted, a man who had watched his mother dragged from their home and his brother shot in the back. He'd sworn never to help a white soul again. But there she was, a white woman, hanging from the same tree where his ancestors had swayed, and something in her struggle, in the way her legs kicked for breath, not defiance, made him hesitate. He took one step forward, then another. The sound of the forest had changed, not the wind nor the rustling leaves, but something deeper, like the trees themselves had gone still, holding their breath as the last of the girl's choked gasps echoed through the clearing. Birds no longer sang, even the insects had quieted, as if the woods knew what had just happened, and what was about to. Tachuka stood motionless beneath the canopy, a shadow among shadows, From behind a thicket of sagebrush and oak, he had watched the entire thing. The wagon, the rope, the way her hands had twitched against the noose like dying butterflies. He hadn't come for her. He'd returned to this cursed patch of earth for one reason: to remember. To kneel at the place where his brother's body had once dangled from the very same tree, where white soldiers had laughed and smoked cigars under his swinging corpse. 12 years. 12 years since he swore never to step foot here again, never to look back. And now a white girl, a settler, a rancher's daughter, hung from the same limb. Fate had a sick way of folding time into itself. Tachuka gritted his teeth. He could walk away, should walk away. This was not his fight. The same blood that had soaked these roots had flowed from his own kin. Let the earth take her. Let the air squeeze out the last of her sins. But then she moved again. Just a flicker, a twitch of her foot. The way a deer kicks after being shot, not ready to die. And something snapped in him. Not forgiveness, not pity. Recognition. He was at the base of the tree in seconds. No hesitation. His blade came out like breath, silent, swift. The noose resisted for a heartbeat, then snapped under the jagged edge of flint and bone. Her body dropped into his arms like a broken sack, heavier than he expected. She was still alive, barely. Her breath came in weak, wet rasps. Her lips trembled. Her eyes fluttered open but didn't focus. Her neck was bruised, red and swelling, but not crushed. He had cut the rope just in time. "Damn you," she croaked. Tachuka froze, not from offense, but surprise. He had expected pleas, sobs, tears, but her voice, raw, scraped like sandpaper, held more fury than fear. She tried to shove away from him weakly. Her fingers curled into fists, even as her arms shook from the effort. She was trying to fight, trying to die on her own terms. Tachuka grabbed a canteen from his side and pressed it to her lips. She resisted. He forced a trickle of water in. She choked, coughed, but swallowed. "Why?" she rasped. It wasn't a question. It was a challenge. He didn't answer, didn't have to. By the time dusk swallowed the forest, he had carried her 2 miles into the interior, where the land rose into black rocks, and the trees grew so dense the moonlight barely reached the ground. There, in the remnants of an old Comanche scouting shelter, he laid her down. She drifted in and out of consciousness. He packed moss, soaked in river water, around her neck, wrapped her bruises with clean strips torn from his own tunic, and built a fire low enough not to give away smoke. She didn't ask questions. She watched him in silence, lips dry, throat too sore to speak. But her eyes never left him, not even when sleep dragged her under. That night, Tachuka sat by the fire, sharpening his blade, not because it needed it, but because the rhythm calmed the noise in his chest. He didn't know why he'd saved her. She wasn't his people, she wasn't his fight. And yet the image of her swinging, so much like his brother, would not leave his head. Maybe it was the look in her eyes, not innocence, not regret, but defiance. The same defiance he'd seen in his mother the day she was dragged from their home. The same spark that refused to dim, even as soldiers burned everything around her. Maybe, just maybe, that spark had lit itself inside this girl too. By morning, she could speak again. Barely. "Where am I?" Tachuka didn't answer. He tossed her a piece of dried venison. She didn't take it. "Should have let me die," she whispered. Still, he said nothing. "You're one of them, aren't you?" she pressed. "Comanche." He nodded once. Her lips twitched. "They said you were monsters." He met her gaze, unmoving. "And what did they call you after you fed us?" Her face twisted. A tear slid from the corner of her eye, but she didn't wipe it away. "They called me a traitor," she said. "A whore, a savage's lover." Silence fell between them again. But this time, it didn't feel like war. It felt like understanding. By the third day, she could stand with help. Tachuka taught her how to move through the forest without making a sound, how to collect water from vine roots, how to tell the tracks of a deer from those of men. She was a quick learner. On the 5th day, They reached a clearing where smoke curled in the distance. Tachuka stopped. "That's as far as I go," he said. She looked at him. "You're letting me go?" "You were already gone," he said quietly. "I only pulled you back." She stepped forward, trembling slightly. "What they did to your people, what we did, I can't fix it." "No," he said, "you can't. But I can tell it." Tachuka nodded once. "And maybe next time someone calls you a monster," she added, voice firming, "I'll be the one to cut them down." A faint smile flickered in his eyes. She turned toward the smoke, toward freedom. As she disappeared into the trees, Tachuka stood alone once more, knife back in its sheath. But for the first time in years, the weight in his chest had lifted. Not because the past was gone, but because someone would remember. The forest no longer felt like sanctuary, not when the hounds were coming. By the 6th day, word had spread through Dry Hollow and beyond that the girl had disappeared. Her body never recovered, the noose cut clean. It didn't take long for someone to cry out the obvious. The savages took her. It was the perfect excuse to send out riders, first lawmen, then bounty hunters, then old vigilantes from the militia days, all armed with rifles, torches, and a hunger for blood masked as justice. They didn't just want Annabeth, they wanted to make an example of her and whoever dared help her. Tachuka had expected this. What he didn't expect was how hard it would be to let her go. Annabeth hadn't traveled far after they parted. Freedom, as it turned out, wasn't a destination. It was a ghost that changed shape the moment you got too close. She'd reached a nearby mining outpost 2 days south, hoping to barter for food and a change of clothes. But the moment she stepped into town, eyes turned. A lone woman, bruised, dressed in Comanche hide scraps. They knew, or they guessed enough to make it dangerous. She didn't even make it to the general store before a miner grabbed her wrist and yelled, "She's the girl, the one who ran off with them." She ran. The chase left her bloodied and breathless, hiding in the roots of a ravine for 2 nights before she limped her way back toward the forest, back toward him. He found her near the river, clutching her ribs, breathing in short gasps. One of her eyes was swelling shut, blood crusted her temple. She was soaked in mud and shame. Tachuka didn't ask what happened. He just lifted her gently and carried her back to the shelter. As he cleaned her wounds in silence, she finally muttered, "They hate me more now, because I came back." He glanced up, his jaw tight. "They hated you the moment you chose to see us." For the first time, Annabeth realized something. She had nowhere to go. To the whites, she was a traitor. To the Comanche, she was still a stranger, white, foreign, untrusted. And yet, Tachuka hadn't turned her away, not once. That night, by the fire, she said what neither of them had dared admit, "I'm not one of them anymore." Tachuka didn't speak right away. Then, "You're not one of us either." Her throat tightened, but she nodded. He looked at her, eyes dark and tired. "You stand in between. That's the most dangerous place of all." Over the next days, they moved only at night. By now, bounty hunters had entered tribal territory, ignoring treaties and spiritual warnings. They shot at shadows, burned camps. One even shot a young Comanche boy from his horse, mistaking him for Tachuka. Retaliation was coming, and both sides were looking for someone to blame. That someone, Annabeth knew, might be her. They stayed low through the hollows and ridges, using deer paths and dried creek beds to avoid detection. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the cry of a hawk overhead, tightened their nerves like drawn bowstrings. One night, as they sheltered beneath a crag of stone, Annabeth asked, "Do you regret saving me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared into the fire, fingers rubbing the edge of his knife sheath. "Regret is what you feel when something could have gone another way," he said. "I never had another way." She swallowed hard. "I don't deserve what you've risked." Tachuka turned to her, face stern. "Deserve has nothing to do with it. You chose to see us as people. That choice cost you everything. I know what that feels like." He didn't say it with anger. He said it like someone who knew the cost of stepping off the path, into the space between two worlds. On the 10th day, a warning came. A young Comanche scout found them just before dawn, breathless and bleeding from a bullet wound in the arm. "They're coming," he told Tachuka in their native tongue. "Your name is on their lips. The whites want you for stealing one of their own. The chiefs. Some of them want to hand you over." Tachuka's face didn't change, but Annabeth saw the flicker in his eyes. "Even your people?" "Some believe peace can be bought," he muttered, "even if it means giving up truth." Annabeth's voice was soft but sharp. "Then let them take me." Tachuka turned slowly toward her. "No, they won't stop unless someone bleeds," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "I've already lost my home, my name, my future. Let it be me." "And if they hang you again?" he asked, voice tightening. "What then?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew she wouldn't survive it a second time. That night the forest burned, not from wildfire, but from anger. A group of white riders had pushed into Comanche ground, torched an old burial site, and shot a tribal elder who refused to step aside. In retaliation, a band of Comanche warriors raided a settler outpost at dusk, taking supplies and 2 men. The cycle had begun again, blood had been spilled, and somewhere, in the middle of it all, stood Tachuka and Annabeth, both fugitives from the labels that sought to cage them. The next morning, they stood at the edge of a ridge, staring down at a caravan trail that led south, toward Mexico, toward possible asylum. It would be a long walk, dangerous, uncertain. Tachuka looked at her. "This is your last chance." Annabeth stared down the valley, wind in her hair, dust in her throat. "No, it's our first." And together, they stepped over the ridge and into a future no one had written yet. One born not of tribes or titles, but of choice. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the air was already tight with heat and threat. Tachuka crouched in the brush at the edge of the valley trail, eyes scanning the horizon, body still as stone. Beside him, Annabeth lay pressed to the dirt, one hand clutching the satchel of water and dried meat they had rationed like gold. They had made it halfway to the southern border, 2 more days to Mexico, maybe 3, but distance was no longer their only enemy. They were being hunted. It wasn't a guess. It was a fact etched into the footprints behind them, the broken twigs, the faint smell of horses. 5 riders, by Tachuka's count, well armed, well paid, and close. "We have to move," he whispered. Annabeth nodded, sweat trickling down her neck. They slipped into the underbrush, heading east to throw off the trail, knowing it would only buy them hours, not days. Each step was a calculation, every rustle a risk. By midday, the desert brush gave way to open scrubland, a death trap, nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. They pushed on anyway. Annabeth's legs burned with fatigue. Her throat felt like cracked stone. Still, she said nothing. She had stopped complaining days ago. There was a quiet between them now, not silence but understanding. It was Tachuka who finally stopped. He raised a hand. A sound, distant hoofbeats, faint but steady, rolled across the earth like a slow drum. He turned to her, jaw tight. "They found us." Annabeth's breath caught. "Can we outrun them?" Tachuka didn't answer. Instead, he scanned the landscape, then pointed toward a ravine to the west. "There, we hold them there." "Hold them? Fight." Her eyes widened. "We can't take 5 armed men. We can't run forever either." The ravine was narrow, flanked by steep rock walls on either side, dry, cracked, perfect for a last stand. Tachuka climbed to a ledge above, while Annabeth crouched behind a boulder below, clutching the old revolver he'd given her. The handle was worn smooth, and the chamber only held 3 bullets. She had never fired a gun in her life, but today she would. The first rider appeared at dusk, a bounty hunter with a red scarf and a rifle across his back. He scanned the rocks with squinted eyes, unaware of what waited above. Tachuka let him pass. The second and third came soon after. Then, the fourth shouted, "They're here!" and chaos exploded. Tachuka dropped from the ledge like a hawk, slamming one rider from his horse with a cry that echoed off the canyon walls. Dust clouded the air. Gunshots rang out. A scream, sharp, human, split the silence. Annabeth ducked behind the stone as bullets sparked nearby. She closed her eyes, prayed to a god she wasn't sure was listening, and fired blindly at the figure moving toward her. The man fell. Her hands trembled. Blood. Real blood. Not from stories, not from books, but from her. By the time the dust settled, 3 bodies lay sprawled in the dirt. 1 rider had fled. The 5th, a grizzled man with a silver beard and a deputy's star, stood with his revolver trained on Tachuka, whose leg bled from a gunshot wound. "Drop it, Redskin," he growled. Annabeth stepped into view, hands raised, revolver empty. "Stop!" The deputy glanced at her, eyes narrowing. "So it's true. You ran off with one of them. He saved my life. He also killed 4 men, because they tried to kill us." The deputy's hand didn't waver. "You're wanted back in Dry Hollow, Miss Cole, dead or alive. They'll pay extra if you're alive." "What if I don't want to go?" He smirked. "Not your choice." Then a voice, raw and full of fire, rose behind him. "It is now." Tachuka had crawled to a rock and drawn his knife. His arm shook from blood loss, but his eyes were steady. "If you take her," he growled, "you'll bleed before she screams." For a moment, the deputy seemed to weigh it. He looked at the girl, at the blood on her shirt, the fire in her eyes, and for reasons Annabeth never understood, he lowered the gun. "You're not worth dying over," he spat. Then he turned and rode off, leaving only hoofbeats and dust behind. Night fell like a curtain soaked in ash. Tachuka collapsed, breathing shallow, skin pale. Annabeth tore strips of cloth, packed the wound, whispered to him to stay awake, to fight. "Don't you dare die on me," she muttered. "Not after everything. Not here." His lips parted. "You cried. For me." She nodded, tears streaking her face. "I'll cry more if you die, damn it." He laughed. Just once. It was enough. By morning, they had buried the bodies and burned the trail behind them. Every step southward was agony, but every mile was freedom. Not just from the men who hunted them, but from who they used to be. One was no longer just a Comanche warrior, the other no longer just a trader's daughter. They had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. They reached the border at dawn. The land before them was a flat, endless plain stretching south, bathed in soft light and the promise of something neither had dared name: freedom. Behind them, the hills of Dry Hollow faded into blue haze and memory. Smoke still curled somewhere far off, from campfires or ruins. It didn't matter. What mattered was the silence. For the first time in weeks, no one was chasing them. Tachuka walked slower than usual. His wound, though tightly bound, had drained much of his strength. But he refused to stop, refused to fall. Not now, not when they were this close. Annabeth walked beside him, her shirt torn and stained, face burned by sun and grit. But her back was straight, her jaw set. She was no longer the girl who had stood on the gallows. That girl had died beneath that tree. The one who walked now was something new. They crossed into Mexican territory around midday. No border guards, no signs, just a shallow creek, barely knee-deep, that marked the invisible line. Tachuka stopped midstream, the water curling around his boots. He looked back once. "This is as far as I go." Annabeth turned slowly. "You're not coming?" He shook his head. "I don't belong there. I never did." "And what about me?" she asked quietly. "Do I?" Tachuka's gaze lingered on her face, the bruises fading, the eyes burning brighter than ever. "You don't belong anywhere they try to cage you." She wanted to argue, to beg him to keep going, but deep down she knew his path had always been different. Still, her voice trembled when she said, "You're the reason I'm alive." Tachuka nodded once. "You lived because you chose to do what was right, even when it cost you everything." "So did you," she whispered. He didn't answer. The wind stirred the grass. Birds circled high above, and in that quiet, Annabeth reached into her satchel and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. She unfolded it slowly, a small, hand-carved figure made of dark wood. The shape was rough, but deliberate. A woman standing beneath a tree, her head held high, her arms unbound. She pressed it into his hand. "You gave me life. Let me give you memory." Tachuka's fingers closed around the carving. For a long moment he said nothing. Then softly, "They'll never believe you." Annabeth smiled faintly. "Maybe not, but I'll tell them anyway." They parted at the riverbank. She walked south, alone. He stood beneath the shadow of a twisted oak, watching until she disappeared into the shimmer of heat and light. Then he turned, melted into the forest, and vanished like a breath. 2 years later. The town of Dry Hollow looked the same. Dusty streets, sun-warped signs, porch swings creaking in the wind. But something had changed. Something that couldn't be seen on a map or carved into wood. It was her. Annabeth Cole stood before a crowd gathered outside the rebuilt chapel, reading from a book with her name on it. Its title, The Man Who Cut the Rope. They called him a savage, she told them, a killer, an enemy. But when no one else saw me as human, he did. When I had no voice, he gave me breath. When I was swinging from a tree, it was his hands that pulled me down. Some listened. Some scoffed. One man spat and walked off, but others stayed. Among them were young girls who looked at her not with fear, but with fire. Men who lowered their hats with something like respect. Old women who wept silently at the memory of their own silenced choices. After the reading, a boy approached her. Couldn't have been more than 10, barefoot, dirt-smudged, eyes sharp. "Miss Cole," he asked, "did you really hang from a tree?" She knelt down. "Yes." "Weren't you scared?" She smiled gently. "Terrified." "And he saved you?" She nodded. "He saved me when no one else would." The boy looked down, then back up. "I think I want to be like him." Annabeth placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then remember this. Being brave doesn't mean pulling a trigger. It means standing between what's right and what's easy. It means cutting the rope, even if the world tells you not to." Years would pass. Stories would twist. Names would fade. But somewhere in the heart of a town built on blood and silence, a different history would take root, one not written in law books, but in truth. They would still call her a traitor, but others would call her something else. Witness. Survivor. The woman who told the story. And somewhere, deep in a forest no longer marked by war, a Comanche man carved another figure out of wood, shaped like a woman with fire in her eyes and rope no longer around her neck. And he smiled. In a land where justice was often claimed by the loudest voices and the strongest guns, this story reminds us that true courage lies not in fighting for power, but in standing up for truth, even when the world turns its back. Annabeth chose compassion over fear, and Tachuka chose mercy over vengeance. Both crossed lines drawn by race, history, and hate, lines that still echo in the divisions we see today. But their bond wasn't about erasing the past. It was about honoring it without being imprisoned by it. Sometimes doing what's right means losing everything familiar, your home, your name, even your place in your own community. Yet it is in that lonely space between what the world expects and what the heart knows to be true, where the strongest change is born. The man who cut the rope didn't just save a life. He broke a cycle. This is more than a Western tale. It's a mirror reflecting how we choose to see one another, how we label enemy, and how rarely we ask why. If this story moved you, or if you're drawn to tales of moral courage, untold truths, and the real soul of the American frontier, subscribe now. There's more waiting on the horizon. From outlaw justice to quiet heroism, the Wild West wasn't just about shootouts and saloons. It was about the human spirit tested in the dust and fire of the unknown. Don't miss the next story. Subscribe and saddle up. We've got miles to ride.